The scent hit you before anything else at Hargrove's. Aged leather, white truffle, and something older beneath it all, the particular musk of money that had been sitting in the same families for generations. Elara Voss had learned to breathe through it in her first week. By the end of her second year, she barely noticed it anymore. She noticed everything else, though. She noticed the way the sommelier's left shoulder dropped imperceptibly when he was nervous about a wine pairing. She noticed which tables ordered the duck when they meant to impress someone, and which ordered it when they genuinely loved food. She noticed the small ceramic bowl of fleur de sel that Chef Renard had placed at table 7 every Saturday for 11 months, ever since a quiet older woman had asked for it once and never returned. He'd kept setting it out anyway, without explanation, and no one on the floor dared ask. Hargrove's did not advertise. You did not find it on Yelp. You found it the way people in that world found everything. Someone whispered your name into the right ear, and a reservation appeared. Elara had found it differently. She'd answered a handwritten index card pinned to a corkboard at the community college in Glenview 3 weeks after she'd withdrawn from her 3rd year at Northwestern. The card said simply, "Experienced fine dining service staff, sought, discretion required." She had never worked a day of fine dining in her life. She had, however, spent 3 years studying linguistics with a concentration in Romantic languages, maintained a 3.94 GPA, and read faster than anyone she'd ever met. She applied. Chef Renard had interviewed her for 6 minutes, asked her to describe the difference between condescension and authority in a person's posture, and hired her on the spot. That had been 22 months ago. Her mother's hospital bills had come down from the stratosphere to merely the upper atmosphere. Progress, of a kind. The Thursday evening in question began like any other. The reservation book showed a full house by 7, with a private party of 6 booked for the corner booth, the one with the original Flemish oil painting of a market scene, which regulars knew cost more than most people's houses. The booking name was Whitmore, party of 6, and the notation beside it read, in the maitra's careful script, GC account, handle accordingly. GC stood for Gordon Colton, as in the Gordon Colton Group, as in the family that had financed 1/3 of the buildings in the city's financial district. Elara had served their associates before. She knew what handle accordingly meant. It meant absorb whatever comes. Smile, recover, do not react. She set the corner booth herself, pressing the linen until the creases lay perfectly parallel, aligning the silverware with the quiet precision of someone who had once spent an afternoon learning the phonemic inventory of Occitan, and found the same satisfaction in systems done correctly. Richard Whitmore arrived first, at 6:53. He was the kind of man who entered a room and immediately took inventory of its power structure. Elara recognized the type not from serving them, but from studying them. The way they scanned a space the moment they walked in, cataloging exits and hierarchies the way a general might survey terrain. He was perhaps 55, silver at the temples, wearing a suit that had been made for his body specifically, not purchased from it. He had the kind of stillness that very powerful men cultivated, the stillness that said, "I do not need to perform for this room. This room performs for me." "Whitmore," he said to the maitre, though his eyes were already on the corner booth, already satisfied it was acceptable. His party filtered in over the next 10 minutes. 2 men Elara placed as junior partners of some variety, eager smiles, deference held just barely in check, the particular alertness of people auditioning. A woman in her late 40s, angular and precise, who spoke to no one as she sat and immediately opened a leather portfolio. And then, last a couple, a man roughly Whitmore's age with the sun-damaged skin of someone who's spent significant time on open water, and a woman perhaps 30 years his junior, who wore her pearls with the relaxed confidence of someone who'd grown up wearing them, not someone who'd bought them. Elara approached the table with still water and the evening's menu cards. No printed menus at Hargrove's, only handwritten cards that changed nightly. "Good evening," she said, her voice carrying the warm neutrality she'd perfected. "Welcome to Hargrove's. My name is Elara, and I'll be taking care of you this evening. May I start you with still or sparkling water, or perhaps something from the bar while you review the menu?" Whitmore did not look up from the menu card. One of the junior men, thinner, with wire-rimmed glasses, said, "Sparkling for the table." In the clipped way people spoke when they wanted to demonstrate they were comfortable issuing instructions to service staff, which was to say, in the way people spoke when they were not entirely comfortable but were working very hard at it. Elara brought the Badeau 8. She poured for each guest in the correct order. She described the evening's featured dishes with the practiced fluency of someone who had memorized not just the ingredients but the provenance of each one, where the lamb had grazed, which cove the sea bass had come from, how long the Comte had aged. She answered 2 questions from the woman with the portfolio, and 1 from the man with the sun-damaged skin. Whitmore had not yet spoken to her directly, which was, in her experience, either a good sign or a precursor to something unpleasant. It became clear, as the first course arrived, that it was the latter. She was returning to the table with the amuse-bouche, a single perfect gougere resting on a spoonful of chive cream, when she heard it. Not in English. In French, but not the careful, formal French of textbooks or even of Parisian menus. In something older, something from the South. Whitmore was speaking to the man with the sun-damaged skin in a low, fluid register that Elara recognized before she fully processed it. Occitan, the langue d'oc, the language of troubadours and medieval poets, the language that had retreated over centuries from the plains and valleys of southern France until it survived mostly in small pockets of rural communities, in academic journals, and, apparently, in the private vocabulary of Richard Whitmore. She caught only the tail of it as she set the amuse-bouche in front of him, but she caught enough, the kind they hire to look presentable. Probably can't tell a beurre blanc from a béarnaise without asking someone. The other man smiled into his water glass. Elara set the last gougere down and straightened. Her face did not change. Her hands did not change. The particular stillness she had learned, not Whitmore's kind, the stillness of power, but the stillness of someone who had learned to compress everything into a very small space, held exactly as it always held. She returned to the service station. She breathed once, slowly, through her nose. Her professor at Northwestern, Dr. Miriam Adler, had been the person who introduced her to Occitan, not as a curiosity, but as a living system, a language that had shaped French and Italian and Catalan, that had given the Western world its first secular poetry, that had been systematically suppressed for centuries by French centralist policy, and had survived anyway, quietly, in the mouths of people who refused to let it go. Dr. Adler had a particular love for languages that survived against the current. She'd said once, during a seminar Elara had sat in on as a second year, that a language was never just a language. It was a record of what a people had decided was worth keeping. Elara's grandmother had been from the Hérault department, in the Languedoc. She had come to the United States at 23 with a husband, a suitcase, and the Occitan, her own grandmother, had spoken to her in secret during the years when the French government had actively discouraged regional languages in schools. She had spoken it to Elara, had spoken it to Elara, imperfectly at first, then better, and then Dr. Adler had given it structure and history and the particular electric quality of something you'd known by instinct, suddenly made legible. Elara was not fluent the way a native speaker from the valleys would be fluent. But she was fluent the way a linguist is fluent. Precisely, comprehensively, with an understanding of register and history that most casual speakers lack entirely. She picked up the next course and went back to the table. The dinner proceeded. Whitmore had grown more expansive with wine, which was not uncommon and not a surprise. He was entertaining his table. She could see it now. The junior men leaning forward, the woman with the portfolio showing the first thaw of something like pleasure, the nautical man matching Whitmore's cadence with the ease of long friendship. Whitmore had the gift of men who had been admired for a long time. He made the people around him feel lit up by proximity. He used it in both directions, she noticed. When she returned with the intermezzo, a small glass of cucumber sorbet, clean and cold, Whitmore was speaking again in that low Occitan register, this time to both men, while the women at the table continued their own conversation in English. He was more relaxed now. The wine had loosened something in his precision. This time she was at the table long enough to hear clearly. He was describing the restaurant, the decor specifically. Then the service. Then, with the particular cruelty of someone who genuinely doesn't believe the person nearby has any inner life worth protecting, her. Decorative, he said, in the old Southern French, but you can tell she's working from a script. No real understanding. They find these girls who are pretty enough to stand near expensive things and call it service. The nautical man made a sound of mild amusement. The industry runs on it, Whitmore continued. Someone has to carry the plates. Elara set the sorbet in front of him. She straightened. And then, because the moment had come, because the particular kind of patience her grandmother had modeled and her mother had inherited, and she had been quietly practicing for 22 months of carrying plates for men like Richard Whitmore had brought her exactly here. She spoke. Not in English. In Occitan, specifically in the Languedocian variety, the one her grandmother had learned in the Hérault, the one that carried, in its vowels, the particular music of a region that had refused to be absorbed. I hope the sorbet is to your liking, she said, conversationally in that language. The cucumber is from a farm in the Hudson Valley that Chef Renard has worked with for 6 years. He's particular about his intermezzo. He says it should taste like a pause, not an interruption. The silence that followed was not brief. Whitmore looked up at her for the first time, not the glance of a man assessing staff, a different look entirely, something recalibrating behind his eyes. She held his gaze and smiled, warm, professional, impeccably blank. Your main courses will be up shortly, she said, in English, and left the table. At the service station, her hands were completely steady. She found this mildly interesting. What happened next unfolded the way things unfold when a man of Richard Whitmore's particular construction is surprised. Not loudly, but with a kind of systemic reordering. She watched it from the periphery of her station as she coordinated the main course timing with the kitchen. He was quieter. The Occitan had stopped. The junior men seemed confused by the shift in atmosphere without knowing its source. The nautical man was watching Whitmore with an expression that suggested he understood something had happened, though perhaps not precisely what. Whitmore's companion, the woman with the pearls, who had said almost nothing all evening, caught Elara's eye as she passed and gave her a look that contained, Elara thought, a very great deal. The main courses were flawless. She made sure of it. She described each dish as it was set down with the same unhurried precision she brought to every table, answered a question about the sauce that accompanied the duck, and suggested correctly that the man with the portfolio would prefer the Burgundy to the Rhone the sommelier had initially recommended for his fish. She was right. He thanked her. Whitmore said nothing. The moment came with dessert. She was setting down the first plate, a slice of tart tatin, caramel catching the low light, when Whitmore spoke to her directly for the first time all evening. "Where did you learn it?" he asked. His voice was even, curious, even. The entitled edge had been carefully replaced by something that wanted to present itself as collegial. "My grandmother spoke it," Elara said. "She was from the Hargrove, and I studied linguistics at Northwestern." A small shift in his posture. "You studied linguistics." 3 years, she said. "I didn't finish." He looked at her for a moment in a way that at anything else in the restaurant all evening. She could see him trying to reorganize what he thought he... "What brought you here?" he asked. "To this." To carrying plates was what he meant. He did not say it that way, but they both understood the sentence he had not finished. "My mother's been ill," Elara said without apology. "For 2 years. The work is reliable and the hours fit around her treatment schedule." She paused. "Hargrove's is also a genuinely excellent restaurant. I've learned more here about what people value than I would have in most classrooms." Whitmore was quiet. On the other side of the table, the woman with the pearls was watching him. The junior men had gone very still. The nautical man was looking at the tart tatin. Elara regarded Whitmore for a moment, not performing warmth, not performing anything. "You do," she said, simply, quietly. Another pause. He gave a small nod, the kind that costs men like him something real. "The service this evening has been exceptional," he said. "Thank you," she said. And then, because she had been raised by a woman who had been raised by a woman who had kept a dying language alive through pure, stubborn love, my grandmother would have enjoyed the compliment. She finished setting the dessert course and left them to it. Later, after the table had cleared and the evening was turning toward its close, the woman with the pearls, whose name Elara learned later from the reservation notes, was Sylvie Marchand Colton, daughter-in-law of the Gordon Colton family, stopped her near the service corridor on her way out. "I want to ask you something," Sylvie said, in the direct way of someone who had grown up with enough money to have dispensed with preamble. "Of course," Elara said. "That program you left at Northwestern, linguistics. Would you go back if the financial situation changed?" Elara studied her. "Yes," she said, without hesitation. Sylvie Marchand Colton nodded once, as if confirming something she'd already suspected. She reached into her small clutch and produced a card. "Heavy stock, simple type, the Gordon Colton Foundation. We fund academic re-entry programs," she said, "for students who left for circumstances outside their control. Call that number on Monday. Tell them Sylvie sent you." She held the card out. Elara took it. She looked at it for a moment. "Why?" she asked. Sylvie glanced briefly in the direction of the corner booth where Richard Whitmore was completing the settling of the bill with his characteristic thoroughness. "Because someone in this room behaved badly tonight," she said, "and one person in this room handled it beautifully. And because my husband's grandmother came to this country speaking a language that people told her was obsolete, and she kept speaking it anyway." She paused. "Some things are worth keeping." Elara looked at the card again. "The Gordon Colton Foundation." "The particular," she said. "Thank you," she said. Sylvie gave a small, satisfied nod. "Monday," she said. She left. Elara stood for a moment in the corridor, the card between her fingers. From the kitchen came the sound of the close-out routine beginning. The low percussion of a restaurant at the end of its evening, the clatter and the quiet conversation, and the particular release of a kitchen crew at the end of a long service. She thought of her grandmother sitting at a table in Montpellier, maybe 9 years old, learning words in a language her teachers had told her family was a relic, learning them anyway. Carrying them across an ocean in the same plain suitcase she'd brought everything else she'd refused to leave behind. A language that survives is not a relic. It's a record of what someone decided was worth keeping. Elara tucked the card carefully into the pocket of her apron and went back to finish her work.